2013, my dad ran the Columbus Marathon to qualify for the Boston Marathon. Now, my dad's been running these marathons, especially the Boston, annually since before I was even born. So it wasn't really a shock that he made it that year. So he's been practicing, and during that time, I made him a little goodie bag in April. And in April, I gave him the little goodie bag, I hugged him, I said good luck, and he was off. On April 15th, 2013, I was called out of my math class at school to answer a phone call from my mom. And as I was walking through the hallways to answer that call, I knew deep down something wasn't quite right. And so my suspicions were confirmed when I answered the call. So when I got into the office, I picked up the phone, and my mom told me that there was a bombing at the marathon, and we hadn't heard from my dad yet. And during that time, when I was waiting to hear from my dad, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I was just frozen. It was as if time had frozen, and it was suspended over my head and rewound. I just didn't know what to do. But I was one of the lucky ones. I heard from my dad he was okay, and he was safe and unharmed at a coffee shop. And so eventually life moved on as if it never really happened. I mean, although it was horrible and really scary to go through, I mean, nothing like that would happen again. We were one of the lucky ones. We had him back at home, and nothing like that would happen, right? But it did. A few years later, 3 years later, on November 28th, 2016, I was bombarded with text after text after text message during one of my literature classes from my mom and eventually my dad about trouble on the Ohio State University campus. And you have to keep in mind, I was kind of sneaking my phone out of my pocket, so I wasn't getting the complete story. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know exactly where my dad was when this was happening. I was only getting snippets from my text messages, incomplete sentences. I didn't know the full story. So throughout the day, that day at school, I was learning from other people about what happened, and I just felt so sad that my dad had to go through another experience like that, so close, only 3 years after the Boston Marathon, and to the same person. Like, what's the coincidence? And so this really got me thinking, this can happen to anyone at any time. So according to an article that I read on terror trends, analyzing 40 years worth of data on terror trends, both international and domestic terrorism, through 1969 to 2009, around 5,600 people lost their lives, and more than 16,300 people were injured due to international terrorism directed at the United States. And this really goes to show that it can really happen to anyone, because throughout this time, it's only increased since 2009. And throughout this experience, this is what I've learned in general. Although we live in a constant fear, because we live in a world in which we are under constant threat of terrorism and violence, but we don't always have to live in a constant fear. I've been interested in pursuing a law enforcement career since I was so young, but these experiences, although they were tragic, they really honed my experience, and they really inspired me to go into counterterrorism, and that's what I plan to do. And so these experiences really taught me that we have to take action rather than letting our fear trap us in a bubble, and we can really recover from anything.